Hey guys, want to talk to you a little bit about this social class system called feudalism that happened in Europe. You got to imagine after Rome fell, like we said, in 476 AD, things got really chaotic and crazy. There were lots of kingdoms fighting each other for land, and it just kind of a system that just fell into place to try to keep control of things. And so what they did, they basically had this system where there was like a king and queen at the top, and then underneath them were the nobles who were lords and ladies, and then another noble class called the vassals who were the knights, and then of course the peasants and serfs. So think about the Jolly Rancher thing that we did the other day, where depending on your color of Jolly Rancher of where you were at in the class system. And also you were in that class system because you were born there. So let's just dig in and learn a little bit about that. So feudalism is the name given to this system where the land-owning nobles, people of higher class who were born there, governed and protected the people in return for services they had to give. So people would fight either in the army if they were a vassal, or if they were a serf or peasant, they had to actually farm the land for the nobles. Basically what it was loyalty and duty among nobles. You gave land, and in return you had to give loyalty back. The nobles really was the lords and vassals. So the king and queen were part of what was known as the royalty. They were also noble birth, but that was royalty. They were at the top, and you were there because your parents were king and queen. Okay. Anyway, but the nobles were the lords and the vassals. And how that worked was the king would give a big chunk of land called a manor to the lord, and then the lords would then give some land to the vassals, and the vassals then had to protect. So the vassals were given land by the lord, the noble, right? The lord gives them this land, and in return the vassal has to protect, because the vassal is a knight. And he has to protect not just the lord, but all the people on the land, the peasants and serfs, and the vassal has to fight for the king if needed. So they are busy working and fighting. The land actually that is given by the lord to the vassal is known as a fief. And it's not just that they give you land. With that land comes the permission to rule the people that live on the land. So if you're a vassal and you're given a fief or land by the lord above you in the manor, he also gives you permission to rule the peasants and serfs. And you can rule them however you see fit. Hopefully you're good to them, but not always. Sometimes they didn't treat them very well. Noble class basically were the kings and queens, the lords and ladies, and the vassals and knights. Very wealthy, lived life pretty well for living back in the Middle Ages. Also, the vassals, who were knights, the men had basically a code of conduct known as the Code of Chivalry. And it was basically a set of rules that they were supposed to live by. If you were to be a good and brave and honorable knight, you would obey your lord no matter what. You were to be brave at all cost, never shy away. You'd give your life if you had to, and you definitely would show respect to women. So you would carry the women over the puddle. You would give them your coat. You would always be honorable and respectful of the woman. And so to me today, like, we still say that if a man opens the door, like I do for my wife, like car door, that's me still showing chivalry, respect to her. By the way, when I walk down the sidewalk with my wife, I make sure I'm on the side of the sidewalk where the cars are going, because out of respect for her, that way if a car came or something happened, I'm there to protect her. I'd get hit, not her. They also were to honor God in the church. All of Europe was mostly Christian, and the church had lots of power, but it was also very important to them. They believed that the church was their way to heaven, and so they were to honor God in the church. And they were to help people as part of chivalry. So if someone says, hey, that was an act of chivalry, it might be because you were helping someone. And then finally, they were to be honest and to fight fair. Meaning if their enemy didn't have a sword, you were to put your sword down and fight hand to hand. The knights were vassals that were warriors in armor, fought on horseback. That armor could sometimes weigh up to 100 pounds, sometimes so heavy that they couldn't even get on the horse by themselves, that they needed somebody to help them up to get on the horse. Here's some pictures of the armor they wore. This over here is a sport that they really, really enjoyed. The more wealthier knights could do this thing called jousting. And how this worked is you're on your horseback and you have these sticks called lances, and they're designed to break. And if you break it off right here in his chest, you get a point. If you break the stick on his head, which is really hard to do, you get 2 points. And if you're lucky enough to actually knock him off his horse, you get 3 points, and you win his horse. And it was really popular. And when you went to these events, the nobles, right, the vassals, the lords and ladies, everyone sat on one side, and the serfs and peasants had to stand on the other, so they were separate. Okay? The manor itself was this large chunk of land, right, given by the king to the lord and lady. This big land called a fief. It had the castle, the church, and all the crops on it. It was ruled by the lord, and the peasants and the serfs did the work. The serfs had it worse. The peasants were at least allowed to own a little bit of property and leave the property they wanted, but the serfs couldn't. They were bound to the land, which means they could never leave without permission. Even if the person who owned the land died and the new owner came, they were still stuck to the land. They're not allowed to leave without permission. They couldn't get married without permission. They couldn't own property. It, almost like being a slave, but not quite, because slaves are actually considered property. And you could sell a slave to someone else. You could not sell a serf. So the serf always just was stuck to the land for generation after generation after generation. Their job was to work the fields, and in return, the knights and vassals protected them. And so that's how that system worked. The only way to get your freedom if you were a serf was you could run away if you're smart enough and lucky enough and stay out of town for a year and a day, like more than a year. You could earn your freedom, but it was almost impossible, and people would turn you in, and it was very, very tough to do. And at the other way was at the end of the Middle Ages, you could buy your freedom once the feudalistic system began to fall apart. We'll talk about that later. Peasants and serfs, it was tough. They were poor. They worked, 12, 14-hour days, 6 days a week. Only day off was for church. They usually only had one outfit, no running water, no electricity, no heat. It was hard living. Okay. Their houses were simple, small cottages, usually one room, usually no furniture or little furniture, depending on what level of you were at. The work was hard. Oh, your animals were kept in the house at night. If you were lucky enough to have animals, you kept them in with you because they'd either get stolen or they'd get eaten by maybe wild animals. So you'd be in the house, mud floor, and these stinky animals, goat, maybe a cow if you're lucky, and the chickens all run around pooping and everything in your house. It was gross, okay? They worked year-round, always hard work. They worked in the fields. They tended to their animals. The women had to do all that same kind of work, but also they had to raise the children at the same time and cook. Like, to make bread was usually what they ate. It was their main food. Okay? Really, really hard work. Here's some pictures of houses or cottages. This one was made of what's like is mud and kind of a grass called thatch. These roofs caught on fire a lot. But this would be a one-room, very small, muddy place, cold. This was a little nicer, 2-story. It also had that grass roof, which would catch on fire, kind of a problem. It would leak with rain and leak with snow. Over here's a little bit nicer. Peasant would live here with the stone walls and the stone fireplace, pretty nice. This one bed would have been for the parents, and really all it was wood with some straw thrown in there. But notice that the animals are inside with them on this dirt floor. This was really, really tough living. Okay, so just remember, king gives land called a manor to the lord. The lord then gives a fief of some of that land to the vassals, who in return, who are knights who have to fight and give loyalty back to the lord. And they also had to protect the serfs. The peasants and the serfs worked the land. In return, they were given protection from the knights. That's how that system worked. And you were born in the system, so you could never, ever get out. So that's how that works. I hope you have a little bit better understanding, and hopefully this will help later with your IAC. So, yeah, you guys have an awesome, awesome day.